Hey, everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Sal. I'm joined today by Gina Ippolito. Gina Ippolito is not only hilarious and awesome and cool, and we went to school together, and we were in like 2 plays together, but also she's like a real writer. She like did real things, and she's going to give some context and some insight into what happened with the writer's strike, what they were fighting for, what they got, whether that was a good deal, and give you guys some context, because I know a lot of people are talking about this, and there was nonstop misinformation. I don't want to say disinformation, but certainly people just not knowing what exactly was going on. I thought, now that we're done, we can give a postmortem to the situation. Is that cool with you?
Sounds great to me.
Yay. All right, great. You wrote for the regular show, Bunked, Murphy Brown, The Unicorn. These are real shows. You can this is real stuff. And so much more. But yeah, so thanks for being on the show. This is your first time on the show, which is a crime.
It is. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'll come back anytime to avoid
Well, don't get too ahead of yourself. We'll see. we don't know. Like, it's, you know, this show could go completely off the rails. We don't know.
I could really crap the bed here.
Between the two of us, I think we know who has the incontinence problem. But let's jump into it. So, what exactly was the issue? Like, what sparked the WGA striking in the first place?
Yeah, so there were a lot of issues that have sort of been slowly unfolding over the past decade, I will say. Right. The last strike in 2007, 2008 was sort of over this new thing called streaming, but also things like residuals for physical media. So DVD sales, which at the time seemed like they weren't slowing down.
Yeah, that was a good idea. That was a good idea to fight for. I understand the motivation. Yeah. We didn't see it coming.
Right, exactly. But at the time, you know, the only, like, Netflix was still a DVD company. Streamers were sort of on the distant horizon. And so the guild, the WGA, thought, like, well, we don't know where this is going. Let's let them categorize this as quote unquote new media, which it was at the time. It was new media. But the problem with that is that then it was not renegotiated for over a decade. Even when it was, I think everyone can agree that streaming is no longer new media. But we were locked into the terms of that 2008 deal, right, where they were allowed to pay writers less, pay actors less, pay fewer residuals. So it was a lot of stuff that when it was new, everyone said, well, we don't know how much money this is going to make. So you can't hold us to the same rules that you do for network TV or cable TV, where people get fair residuals. And, you know, like back in the day, shows were 22, 25 episodes. So they sort of started to have some success with streaming shows like Stranger Things on Max, formerly HBO Max, formerly 90 other titles. But the writers were still being paid that same low new media rate, even as their shows were making millions and billions of dollars for the company. Yeah. And so basically it was, you know, like, it's sort of become this thing that every show eventually ends up on streaming now. But we were still locked into these terrible deals, and there are more and more shows being made only for streaming. Exactly. And when you're a writer who you know, this is how you make your money, everyone thinks that we're getting millions of dollars. Everyone thinks that every writer on Stranger Things or The Bear or White Lotus or whatever is making millions of dollars, which is not true. They're making far less than someone made for even sort of a crappy show on network TV 10 years ago. Right. So that was sort of the one of the main things, was getting fairer deals for this. And then the other thing is, like, AI. Our robot's going to take our jobs and then take over our planet, and then will I salute our new robot overlords?
I mean, hopefully not. The AI thing, I feel like that was a conversation that came out like during the strike, though I imagine it was probably preliminarily a conversation ahead of time, but it started to come out like when ChatGPT became ubiquitous, when people were like, oh, I'm using this to completely write my thesis at this point. It was kind of like this conversation of like, wait a minute, we should get a lid on this. And I don't think, and I don't want to speak for you, but like, I feel like no one who is a member of the WGA, who writes for TV, who writes for anything, is worried that they're going to lose their jobs from AI. It's more, well, not lose their jobs. They're going to lose their jobs, but rather that they're not, that like AI is going to be better or as good. It's more that like uncreative people are like, well, I don't value the difference, so I'll just go with the one that's a robot. That's free.
Yeah. You've already like seen some of it on Twitter with people being like, I wrote a children's book, like, and I generated AI art, and they're terrible. But you know, like if you get that published, someone will buy it.
Right.
But this was like an interesting thing where the AMPTP, the body that sort of negotiates for the streamers and for the studios against with the WGA, they negotiate with, but they sort of tip their hand because the WGA said, let's put in something about AI, how AI can't create it, thinking, yeah, all right, we'll put this thing in.
Similar to like the streaming thing where it's like, let's kick the can down the road. Like, let's address that.
Like the WGA was aware of it, but it wasn't one of our top concerns. It was sort of like,
they were planning it.
Yeah, like, hey, like you can't use this to undercut us. So we put that in the negotiations, and the AMPTP said, absolutely not. Yeah. No, we will not do that. And then the rest of the guild was like, oh, they're planning on doing that.
Right.
Let's up our ass. Yeah. Like, whereas if the AMPTP had just been like, yeah, sure, okay, like we're not planning anything, like we would have been like, yeah, okay. But instead they were like, no, it was methinks the AMPTP doth protest too much. Precisely. And we sort of became aware, oh, they're already planning this. And it was never like, you know, ChatGPT is going to take our jobs, but because every script step is an extra step that you get paid for. The concern was, well, they'll have AI write the first draft and then not pay a writer for that first draft, pay them for a second draft, which you get paid much less for. Yeah, and it would end up being a huge... Yeah, it would end up being like a huge rewrite, but our concern was that they'll say, well, there's already a draft, so we're not paying you for the original draft, we're paying you to rewrite AI.
Yeah.
So that was sort of like the main concern, that they would use it to just undercut and pay us less. Not that it was going to be like so great that it was going to be, you know,
replacing people. But
exactly. Although who knows, maybe 20 years from now, it will replace people.
Well, the worst of it is that AI is an aggregator of what already exists. Like you need humans in order to have a bedrock of information for the intelligence to draw from. Mm-hmm. So it's like you can't, and one can't quantify unless it's, you know, in my realm, like AI comics, which is just like an oxymoron, it's garbage. But like, you're literally stealing art from other artists they're not drawing new things. They're making stuff from other people's work. And so like with comics, you can point at like, that's a Mike Allred, you know, that's a Brian Ball. Like you just took his art. In writing, it's really harder to tell, like, well, whose blog script treatment did you steal from to make this thing? And then it's harder to point at, like, who owns that part of it. And so it's like, that's a concern.
Yeah. And like, unfortunately, the companies are sort of using scripts and books right now to feed into it, which is not something, you know, there's been a lot of confusion over, like, well, why didn't the guild stop it from doing this? But that's something that needs to be taken care of on a governmental level. Like, totally. The AMPTP has nothing to do with ChatGPT. They're not the ones, like, the studios aren't the ones saying, like, yeah, feed it the Godfather. Those are like the tech bros that run ChatGPT, which are like, yeah, like, let's feed it every movie ever made. And only now are you sort of starting to see people suing and legislating. So hopefully that gets taken care of, but it wasn't something we could get taken care of in our negotiations because it has nothing to do with the people we were negotiating with, unfortunately.
We're negotiating for salary. We're not trying to change policy.
Yeah, you know? Unfortunately, not something that we could. Yeah, so I've seen some people on Twitter say, like, why didn't you guys, like, stop it from, like, stop them from using scripts? And it's like, that's not how laws work.
Right. Yeah. But hopefully, I mean, like, I would like to see that change, but yeah, that was not the conversation you were having then.
Right. I think it'll change, like, when all the George R.R. Martins sue and all the, you know, the Quentin Tarantinos all get together and just sue. And then ChatGPT is like, oh, this is costing us more money than we're making, so let's stop doing it.
Where is Martin Scorsese? You know, he's so upset that people are walking on his lawn. Why isn't he getting upset? You know, why aren't they getting fired about this? They're like mad at Marvel movies, but it's like, dude, they're stealing your script and they're putting it into a thing and they're like, we're going to write Goodfellas 2 and it's going to be way better because it's like,
I mean, maybe it's because every time like someone brings up AI to these old guys, they're like, huh?
What? The Terminator? Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Like, how do I set the clock on my VCR?
Kaboom. Yeah, that's fair. So, okay, AI kind of like really lit the fire in the negotiations to turn it into a full blown strike. How did the strike affect you personally as a writer, as a career woman in LA? What was your life like? How was it affected by
Yeah. So like, fortunately, I like a month before the strike took a non-union job writing for a YouTube channel called New Rock Stars. Things have been slow because of everything we struck for the past. Well, since the pandemic, really, they were things had slowed down for everyone, not just me. But I had gotten to a point where I was like, all right, let me take this job. I think there's going to be a strike. Things are slow anyway. So I was lucky enough to like have a day job, a flexible day job that was still creative, still writing. I get to appear on camera. So it was like the dream of, well, I wasn't on a show that was on pause. I mean, granted, it doesn't pay as much as being staffed on a TV show, but it was enough for me to survive on. But like that being said, we're still picketing 2 to 3 days a week. I'm also a member of SAG. So when SAG went on strike, I was doing sort of double duty on the picket lines. Totally. But yeah, I mean, it was mostly just, I knew there was nothing I could do during this time. I can't be pitching shows. I can't be, going out on general meetings. I can't be going out on staffing meetings. So it was just sort of a like, well, this is what I do. I picket and I go to my day job and then I go home. Which was like oddly kind of soothing in a moment of chaos to be like, this is my routine now. Right. Yeah. No, if you follow Gina's socials, you'll see like a really fun, like kind of like map of the experience and seeing like, well, here's how we themed our strike protest today, and here's where we went, and here's like who was there and what kind of like accoutrements we brought or wore or what we ate and that it's fun. But I mean, fun from a casual observer whose livelihood was not directly affected by it. It's fun to be, but at the same time, would you say that the effects of this have not yet truly been felt? I think like the effects of the strike just by like normies, who just regularly watch TV are only now sort of starting to be felt. Like there was, everyone always has shows that they want to catch up on. So I think just now they're like, wait, how come there are no new episodes of Stranger Things, or how come there are no new episodes of House of the Dragon, or whatever their show is? Right. Or like, why is this movie's date getting pushed back? So I think like just among the plugged in. Like community, they're just now starting to feel it. And I think like in terms of like now that the deal is done, there's probably going to be a contraction in society of how many TV shows are put out, which was always coming, which wasn't a result of the strike. But I think, like it will start to, I think like in January, people will start to sort of, just like in the 2008 strike, people were like, how come there's like fewer episodes of Lost and these ones feel shoddy? And like, what about Heroes? Like all of a sudden Heroes isn't like quite as good as it was. Yep. Mm-hmm. I think like next year people will sort of be like, oh, there seems to be a little bit of a dead zone of like new shows that I want to watch. So I think it hasn't, people fully haven't caught up yet to the fact that like there was a strike. It cost our community billions of dollars and Los Angeles billions of dollars. So we'll see. Yeah. But it cost more than it would have had there been a deal in place immediately. Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean ultimately. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the studios of the networks and the AMPTP could have made this deal with us on day one. They could have continued to negotiate. It could have taken a week, and they could have done it. But they chose to drag it out for 158 days or whatever it was. So it's on them. I mean, they very clearly lost. So it was them throwing a tantrum, trying to break us for that long. They could have come back to the table at any time and made this exact same deal, but instead they dragged it out.
It's interesting. The I want to key in one element of one of the deals that was made, and we'll talk more specifically about that in a minute. But like, there has been this phenomenon lately, and when I say lately, I mean for the period of streaming, when streaming became a thing that we were all just like in on, where we were all deluding ourselves into thinking this is going to replace cable, and now I'm going to spend 3 times as much for all the streaming services because I'm one of those people who's been screaming at the clouds about how I was like, there shouldn't be like 10 streaming services. Like Netflix is a model that I don't think exists realistically if it's against HBO Max or Max and Disney Plus and Paramount Plus and like whatever Acorn. Just the fact that like Netflix existed and all the deals that were in place were because like they were the only one. They were an aggregator. I think that Netflix is out of its like not out of its depth, but like certainly that it went through a significant amount of growing pains because it didn't need to become a content creation platform. It had to learn to become one because it used to just be like, no, everyone make a deal with me and then just I'll put your shit out on the thing and that's it. And that made a lot of sense when there was one. But now there's 11 or 12 and they all want $9 to $12 to $14 a month. It's like that's unsustainable.
Yeah, I think the promised land of the streaming services that we all thought was going to happen has been proven to not be true, much like a lot of stuff in the tech sector when people are like, NFTs are going to make me rich. But I think like originally people were like, oh, I can watch my favorite shows anytime I want, this will be great and I don't need to spend as much. All of those things have been proven false. Like even I don't have to sit through ads. Like now there are ad supported tiers. Now, if you're getting all these streaming services, it's more expensive than network and cable. And also like they're pulling shows. So even the like awesome promise of like, I can watch this specific show anytime I want to, even that has been proven false. So there's no upside really to streaming anymore. I mean, other than the fact that like if you want to watch something very specific and a very specific episode, now you can, which I mean was like always the case if you just bought a DVD, which ultimately would cost you less.
But now I don't have to store the DVD. Don't you understand? I don't need a shelf of movies. And it's like, that's hard. That's cold comfort. I gotta tell you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's we were all sort of lured in with the golden arches of the streaming service promises, and now they have proven to be an oasis that ended up being false. Right,
but and not only is it like a problem in terms of logistics and cost and everything, but almost immediately. And I think it was thanks to Netflix's like business and practices when they started, keeping everything internal. It used to be like we'd know, you could find out immediately over a weekend if a movie bombed because you go, well, I know how much the box office is. And I know from like one Variety article from 1991, if I double the budget, then I know how much they spent on marketing and I can pretty much guarantee, or I can at least ballpark whether the movie did well or not. But there's like figures and numbers you can figure out. And it's like, I know how much a movie costs. I personally less about how much shows cost because I don't know what article or trade I need to read or to see the budget.
I was
baffled to find out like, oh, this new, like when they were like, oh yeah, no, there's Obi-Wan cost $300 million, and I'm like, oh,
yeah
why?
Yeah, and it's very, I mean, even show budgets are like, they're very misleading because sometimes it's sometimes you can't see it in the, like I've worked on multicam shows that should be cheap but are very expensive because of where they were shot or who the cast was and what their quotes are. So like everything can inflate a budget artificially, it's not, and those articles are very rarely, I mean, sometimes they work in like promotion and things like that. Right. So they're never accurate.
Absolutely. But even when we had like the illusion of a ballpark, streaming has completely stymied that to the point where it's like, oh, you have no idea how much anything costs, how much anything did. You have no idea how a show performed. The only way you knew it didn't work out is if the show got canceled. Even then, you don't know if they canceled it because it didn't do well or because they didn't feel like making the show anymore. So that was a normalization of the process that I think really kind of effed up the entertainment industry, where it's like just having like an Apple approach to budgets, being like, no, don't let anyone outside know how much shows cost, how much they make. And I assume based on the deal that was struck, that part of it was, and don't let anyone else know how much they could be making in residuals.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing with like streamers is that because they weren't releasing their numbers, they could simultaneously tell the creative side, we're not profitable yet, and tell their shareholders, we're super profitable. We have so many views. We're trending every week. And no one could prove them wrong. One of the brilliant things that the WGA did was like they played those two things against each other. Every time they said to us, it's not profitable, then they would say like, well, here are the numbers you're releasing to your stockholders, sort of forcing the streamers and the networks to either contradict it and say like, well, we lied to them, or well, we lied to you. Right. Yeah, I mean, this was my first strike being in the guild, and the WGA did a great job of using social media to fact check the liars in real time, which is a thing I wish everyone could do at all times with everything.
Agreed. Yeah. It requires a like motivated collaborative force that has one unified goal, right? And I think that really helped.
Right.
But yeah, so my issue is just like I'm thrilled to see that apparently one of the deals was like you guys have access to the information now about like some element of numbers. Like you get to know. Yes. You get to pull back the curtain a little bit about how your shows are doing if you're working.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which was a thing that in the first 3 months of the strike, the streamers refused to negotiate. Like they said this is a non-starter. Like the term like the sentence that you kept seeing on social media was rejected our proposals, refused to make a counter. So that was what they did with, and then at some point they sort of said like, well, we'll show it to 3 people who can't share that information with everyone, or we'll sue them. And we said that's also not acceptable. So yeah, that was one of the things that we won, was sort of streaming transparency. Where basically, like select people in the guild will be told, here's total number of hours viewed, right? Because like the whole thing was, well, how do you quantify? Like if someone watches a show for 5 minutes, does that count as a view? Like we know as people who do YouTube things, is it like, are they watching from start to finish? Are they watching like most of it? Are they accidentally clicking on it and then clicking away?
Yeah, exactly.
So they agreed to share, number of hours viewed, which is huge. They just said like you can share it with members, but don't like go running to the press, which we all know that like it will leak anyway.
Well, that's fine. Like I think that's acceptable losses, because like that's how it works already. Right. That's how we know to double the budget, to at least have a ballpark figure about whether a movie does well or not. Like it's because no one said, oh, we'll just tell them to do this. Like, no, that was somebody, said something in an article one time, and now it's common knowledge. And it's like,
and there's been a lot of there's a lot of conspiracy theories about like why they didn't want to show these numbers. And there's sort of like 2 schools of thought. Like one is they don't want to pay the writers and actors residuals. Sure. The other, which I think is more likely because there's actually much more money on the line, is they don't want to show their stockholders the actual numbers. So some people were like thinking, well, the numbers are much higher and then they'll be forced to like pay residuals. But I actually think the which a lot of people think, the numbers are much lower, and they don't want to tell their shareholders because like, percentage wise, they don't owe that many residuals anyway. Like even if a show is successful nowadays, the way things are, like no one's getting rich off of residuals. But it's much more likely that they're like telling their shareholders and their stockholders, like, we're super successful. And then people are like, oh, 10 people watch this show that you've been telling us is like your number one show. You lied. So yeah, I think now, this is a good sort of jumping off point for in the years to come, other industries to say like, you should be showing us your numbers. For years, like legally, you sort of had to show people your numbers. It's crazy that there are all these like legal loopholes for what is essentially the same industry that it was 50 years ago.
Exactly. That was the thing that always baffled me, was just like, And it's one of those things. It reminds me of the old, like, I think it's Chris Rock bit where it's just like, if I could pay you less, I would. That's what minimum wage is. And it's like, this is one of those things where it's like, if I can get away with it, I will do it. Like, and it's just, if I, like, that someone upstairs just went, wait, is there nothing on the books that says we have to tell them how well a show is doing if it's on streaming?
Right,
like,
right.
Then we just won't. Like,
yeah, which is what a lot of these negotiations is like closing loopholes that have been sort of exploited in recent years. Like, there are a lot of things that were a given for, since the industry started, that only since the tech sector, the tech bros, for lack of a better term, have gotten involved. Like, then they were sort of like, oh, well, why we don't have to do this thing. We're not being told. So now the guild is sort of playing catch up, because for years, the people in charge might not have been creatives themselves, but they did at least want to make a good product. And then once the tech sector got involved, they were like, we don't care if it's a good product, just make it for cheap. Like that's sort of when all hell broke loose, which I think every industry is seeing more and more, with like the tech bros getting involved. Every art of every kind, once a tech bro gets involved, is never going to be good. It's never going to be a good thing.
It's true. It's gonna be diminished, or it's at least you're not going to know like what hand is rocking the cradle. But like
right.
In this case, it's like, okay, so the main fight was over AI, and I guess, even though we said like Residuals, it's not going to be as juicy a plum, but like Residuals in its
yes, definitely.
So what were, if any, some of the capitulations that you guys offered? Like, what was some of the things that like you didn't get that was on the table, if anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually like ended up getting movement on everything we asked for, which has almost never happened.
Seriously.
Like the main thing is like in some cases we didn't get as much as we wanted on like in movement, but there's always been things that we bring to the table that then get taken off. But this time that didn't happen. We said it's sort of all or nothing, but we will negotiate the details within that thing.
Gotcha.
So that in and of itself is historic, that we didn't just take anything off the table completely, which is a testament to the fact that we struck for so long. SAG struck with us, and there was no way we were going to stop if we didn't get at least some movement on all of this.
That's great.
So a lot of it is in the details, for instance, like, every 3 years, which is when our contracts are negotiated, we get, like a pay bump that's supposed to keep up with inflation. So like things like that were, like we asked for a 6% pay bump in the first year. We got a 5% pay bump in the first year.
All right.
Yeah. So things like that. Again, it's a lot of like the devil's in the details, like, like for streamers, for instance, movies that are released only on streamers, we wanted any feature with a budget over $12 million to receive full theatrical terms. So better initial compensation, better residuals. That was something that they said, we'll give that to you, but for a budget of 30 million or more instead of 12 million. So we got movement on everything. It just, and I mean, that's like what a negotiation is, right? But just the fact that we got movement on everything, and then in 3 years we can say like, all right, now we do want it for a budget over 12 million.
Exactly. We've seen the data. We have proof that like it does actually affect us, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, we did get very close on a lot of things because I think that they realized that they were going, it's still like technically right now, the membership has not voted through this proposal. Right. So they had to like negotiate knowing that people that have been on strike for 158 days are going to vote yes. People who have been out of work for several years in some cases are going to vote yes. So it's basically like the membership has nothing to lose by waiting longer, like if you haven't staffed on a show in 2 years, another 6 months or 8 months or 10 months is nothing. So we still have to vote it through, and they knew, like that the membership was never going to vote it through unless we got movement on everything. So it really was a successful, again, there were some details where it's like, oh, I wish it was over 12 million instead of over this. I wish we got a 6% raise instead of a 5% raise. But there was movement on everything that we asked for eventually.
Yeah. And it looks like it's the kind of thing where it's almost like an admission, like, well, there's movement on every single detail, which suggests like, yeah, I guess everything you were asking for was pretty fair because we addressed it. Wasn't there, as you said, there were a couple of like non-starters. And normally that's in a situation where, like that's that kind of reaction is usually reserved for unreasonable requests. But in this case, and as we've pointed out, like not unreasonable at all, and is in fact important or paramount to the conversation.
Right.
And they did move it up, and they did move on.
Yeah.
Which is like,
we proved that they could have done this from the start. There was nothing that was going to. I mean, the money that people love to, the number that people love to quote is like what the writers were asking for was less than 2% of their like what they make in a year, their budgets for a year. Right. So it was we were never breaking the bank. The main reason they didn't want to give it to us is because they know that they're going to have to give the writers the same thing. They're going to have to give like the Teamsters the same thing. So that was really why they were rejecting most of it, was because they didn't want to set a precedent, which they sort of admitted to in the press. Like they said very stupid things on the record, like, well, if we give them this, we're going to have to if we pay them fairly, we're going to have to pay everyone fairly.
Oh my God. And you can imagine those other groups being like, exactly. Well, and doesn't that kind of betray the kind of like insulated nature of those who are in the decision-making place, where it's like, don't say the quiet part out loud. Like,
which they did throughout the strike, right? There's been a lot of think pieces about how badly they bungled the PR portion of this whole thing, which I think if they had been better at not being complete idiots and making constant like terrible sound bites, like they want us to go homeless, or like billionaires on their yacht saying like, well, they're asking for unreasonable things without even thinking like this might not look great. I think if they had been better at just the PR portion, we probably would not have gotten everything we wanted to. But the public was so overwhelmingly on our side that the longer they held up, just the more pissed people got at them, not at us.
Right. Exactly. Maybe if they had a couple of writers on retainer, that would have been.
I mean, they went through 3 PR firms. So during the duration of the strike, they hired 3 different PR firms. And I think it proved that, writers are better than PR firms.
Yeah. Now, I want to address really briefly. I don't want to spend any time on it, really, but I should address it only because I've seen it too much, even in my own sphere. The naysayers, ne'er-do-wells, the people who are like arguing in favor of management, so to speak, where they were like, you're like, and this is part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation in the first place, is to like dispel any rumors or any misconceptions about like the level of reasonability that you guys were asking for and what you got, because I don't think what we're looking for here, and I don't think what was argued for here was, and feel free to correct me or reinforce it, the idea that you were in a position of we're trying to match where they are, what they have, and we're trying to pay for our own yachts. Like we want to break into like the 1%. I don't think that was the goal. It was about living wages and about like look, if you need me to be on set, I have to live in the area.
Yeah. I think, overwhelmingly sort of, I mean, I have an itchy block finger on Twitter. If anyone even like mildly annoys me, I'm like, no, I don't want to deal with this. Like, I don't want any of my day sucked up by thinking about this random person with 2 followers. Totally. I think like overwhelmingly sort of the naysayers, when you go on Twitter and see them, when I would go to their profiles, like we would have no friends in common. They wouldn't live in LA. And like, if you're not even friends with 4 writers, like you legitimately know nothing, right? Like I know nothing about investments and things like that. So if an accountant comes to me and is like, hey, this is like what this is, I'm not then immediately going to be like, but is it what it is, person who spent the last like 20 years of your life studying this thing? I don't think it is. For some reason with creatives, people love to do that. And I think it's because they think anyone can do it.
Right.
But, you know, like a lot of the people that were like, you're asking for too much, couldn't specify why. Yes. Or what we should be asking for. And that's because they truly know nothing. I mean, there are again, like some conspiracy theories that the PR firms, there were very, very newly created accounts that started only since the strike that were sort of going in with 2 followers or 0 followers, sort of going in and being like, you're being unreasonable. And it's like, cool, David Zaslav's second cousin, who clearly you are. So yeah, I will say that like I didn't see anyone who knows anything saying we were in all of the WGA groups. If anything, it was the opposite. People were saying we're asking for too little based on how many billions we have made for these people. Yeah. So yeah, I will say that like the proof is that they did give us essentially everything we asked for, which they wouldn't have if it was unreasonable. Totally. And I also think that like, you know, the proof is in the numbers. The like CEOs' salaries have grown while writers' salaries have shrunk. And ideally, you're keeping up you're keeping up with a percentage. You know, the sort of United Auto Workers strike right now is great, where they're like, hey, CEO pay has climbed by 50%. Why do you think you deserve that? And they're like, well, we think we deserve 40% because we helped grow this business, which is true. I mean, it should keep pace. And with the exception of the last 10 years, it was keeping pace. Yeah. It was only when people were basically like, how much abuse can we get away with inflicting, that it wasn't. So yeah, I think the proof is in the fact that they did give us essentially what we asked for. And if it was truly unfair and unreasonable and could not be maintained, they wouldn't have given that to us, because they would have said, if we give you everything we're asking for, we'll all crumble collapse in the next like few years. But I think the fact that we were asking for less than 2% of their budgets and their profits is proof that, I mean, in my mind, like, hell, ask for 30% of what they got going on. Exactly. Like, why are we asking for less than 2%? Like, I want to ask for more.
Right. Like, if they want to say it's unreasonable, let them be right about it. You know, like, no, I want 35, 40% of what you're making, and then let them negotiate. That's true negotiation.
Yeah. There's a great Twitter account actually right now that was created sort of since the negotiations were finalized, which is just like someone's name with like, we got it, bitch, in it. And like, they basically go back to the old threads where people were like, you'll never get minimum staffing. You'll never get transparency. And then they just reply, we got it, bitch. Because like it's just proving that everyone who said you won't get this is a non-starter. Everything that they said was a non-starter, we got. So clearly that's not the definition of a non-starter.
Absolutely not. No, it's true. Yeah. And it also diminishes the term non-starter, because I mean, like, well,
right.
Though.
Exactly.
Yeah. So where are we now? Like, what's the I mean, is it clearer skies? Is there still some fights that need to be fought? Yeah,
I mean, like every negotiation will sort of make things a little bit better. Sure. You know, like there are things that it would have been great to get more of, you know, for example, minimum staffing, which was one of the things they said was a non-starter, which we got, you know, you have to have 3 writer producers in the room, no matter what. So you have to hire, like, it's the showrunner and then 2 other writer producer level writers, because there's different levels of writers. We had asked for 6, we got 3. So that's something that, you know, next year we'll ask for 6 again, you know, like, and we'll get more. I do think that, like, you know, I just sort of retweeted this today that like there's a contraction that has been happening basically since the start of streaming, when the streamers sort of overplayed their hand and spent. And the thing is, like, I came up in a world of like digital content. Like, I worked for Defy Media and Awesomeness TV and Rooster Teeth. And like all of these places had the same problem, which was like they were sort of run by tech people. The tech people were like, well, let's throw so much money at this. We're broke. Yeah. Crap. And so like there was a joke among like digital writers, which was like, get in before they know better.
Yes.
Get that money and get out. And so like the same sort of like tech bros were taking over, the streamers were starting the streamers, and they were saying like, woo, like let's buy all these shows. Let's do it. And then they were like, oh, we don't know what we're doing. Okay, and like now they're at the point of where they're like, maybe instead of making 100 crappy cheap products, we're going to make 10 really good ones. Yeah. So, the sort of narrative has already started where it's like, writers screwed themselves out of jobs, which was like always going to happen. And also, if you have to work on 5 shows for beans, whereas like I would much rather work on 1 show a year and actually be able to put the time and effort in for slightly more money than trying to scramble to get like 10 jobs a year.
Seriously, yeah.
So I think that a contraction is coming. I think it will take probably until the next negotiations 3 years from now to right the industry again. Like now we were sort of bailing out a sinking boat as there were still holes in it. Yeah. Now we've plugged the holes, but we've still got to bail out the boat. Right. So yeah, I think it will take a few years for the industry to realize what they're doing now, which we could have done from the start if they had been fair. But like we've bandaged up all the wounds, but now we need to give a blood transfusion. I'm mixing metaphors like crazy. So I don't think it's clear sailing. I think we are coming out of the clouds. It will just take some time.
How many metaphors has that been? 3, 4? I think we're good.
I'll throw all of them at you. I'm a rusty writer that's been out of work for 150 days. What's a metaphor?
That's right. I'm getting, you know what? That's good. We're working out the cobwebs here. We're getting.
Yeah, exactly. Brain, do the thing now.
Yeah, make funny. So when we get to the point where things are ideal, where do you think, like, what does that look like to you? Does it involve 12 streaming services that maybe only make like 3 shows, like 3 or 4 shows a year? Is it maybe like you were talking about a condensement, like maybe like 3 streaming services? Like, as I think that one streaming service it doesn't work today because of course, like that is, when it was one that sent DVDs and didn't make content, it's like that's a distribution method. I'm cotton to that. But when you're the only one that makes it, you're kind of a monopoly at that point.
Right.
So there's something good about healthy competition, but at the same time, maybe not this much. Like, how many more things do we need here?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the interesting thing is like everyone always says like you can't go back, right? Like once the genie is out of the bottle, you can't go back. But I think we had a system that worked for 70, 80 years.
Yes.
And the funny thing is that like the streamers were like, oh, never ads, no ads here. And now they're like, oh, what about ads?
Yeah.
And there are a number of things that the streamers are doing now that the joke is like, oh, so you just invented television, you invented network and cable TV with ads. Yeah. Great. Congratulations. They sort of came in, broke a system, and then we're like, what if we rebuild it, but crappier? Now we're basically fighting to get back to what was, which is, like paying writers and actors a fair residual amount. If you do have ads, like giving us a cut of those ads, right? Because the whole reason that they were saying they were paying us less, not only was like, well, it's new, we haven't figured it out before, but was like, well, we don't have ads, so how can we pay you? But like my Hulu has ads. I have the lowest tier and I see ads all the time on Hulu. Now they're doing it on Netflix. Now they're doing it on Disney. So they're basically going back incrementally to what was working for 50 or 60 years. I do agree that like there are some things that are a harder sell to get back to. Like, people sort of got used to seeing shows when they wanted to. But even with like the Disney dropping an episode a week, like Netflix was like, what if we drop them all at once? Like, this is great. This is how everyone wants to watch TV. And then they realized, oh, our more people watch it if we release one a week. And then Disney was like, if more people watch it, that's what we should do. So again, they keep going back to like, a system of ads, a system where they release it once a week. I think like it's going to be a slow crawl back to what once was.
Yeah.
But that is the ideal like model, is the model that worked for 70 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, like as at least, I think that's the approach, is just not trying to crawl back to TV, but looking at TV before streaming and just what made it better. How do you make that better? Like because it was a system that was tempered by decades of trial and error, and reaches a point where like, were people sick of TV by the time streaming came in? I mean, they were sick of bad TV.
Right.
They were sick of like the tropes, the things that wouldn't like work, like the talk show.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? Or the infomercial. But like, look at, it's funny. I remember making ads, like making like ad reads and crap for our own YouTube channel, and watching that happen and seeing, especially in the advent of YouTube, and watching everybody who like had no broadcasting experience, had no entertainment industry experience, having to make ad reads for like Amazon.
Yeah.
And what do? They copy what they remember from TV.
Right.
They literally just made tropes of, or like bad, pale versions of what they saw from TV. I know I'm guilty of it. I'd be like, oh, I didn't see you there. Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
But
I'm parodying something that no one knows what the hell it is anymore.
Yeah. I mean, like the TV was a lucrative industry for everyone involved for decades. And then something that no one wanted fixed, like somebody came in and said, I'm going to fix this thing that nobody wants fixed, and sort of upended it. And by the way, like that was one of the reasons the negotiations took so long, because traditional like networks were like, you came in and broke this. Like, why are we like, why is like CBS Network or NBC, why are they sort of acquiescing to the people that broke their model? Like, why are they like, there were a lot of things like CBS doesn't care if Netflix releases their numbers. So the fact that Netflix was like, we're not negotiating until you take this off the table. CBS was like, we don't care if it's taken off the table. Like, release your numbers. We've been doing it for years. Like, we have an outside entity called Nielsen who tells everyone what, like just do it like we're doing it. So that was one of the reasons why it took so long, was because network TV was being forced to negotiate the same deal. It's like having a nerd who's getting a swirly, like be like, well, my bully needs compensation too. I'm not gonna like, they had to negotiate with the people who like punched them in the face repeatedly for the past like 5 years.
Yeah. Do you think that overall, like this is more speculations, I don't want to get you in trouble, but do you think that like the reason for me, and I think we touched on this a little bit, but like one of the major reasons why there's such reticence to release numbers is because it's just so damn low. And do you think that like do you think it's lower than we think? Like it's so low that it was no, you don't understand. If we release the numbers, it'll destroy our entire industry, because like it's really not as big as you think it is. We're just inflating it to like the same way that like you like really loud people get a lot of attention, but it turns out that like they don't have a lot of followers. It's just that they're very good at getting people's attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think the numbers are much lower. Like, anytime you go on Netflix, they're like, here's the top 10 shows. And it's like inevitably a Netflix show is in there. And I'm like, who is watching this show, Netflix? You are lying. It's like I swear I have a girlfriend. She lives in Canada. Like Netflix is like, I swear to God, like people like the show. You should watch it. And then because it's suggested to them, maybe people do watch it. Oh, definitely. So I do think it's like, I think even popular shows probably aren't being watched as, I think even like the Stranger Things is like, I think probably are not being watched by as many people, which like, part of the appeal of streaming was that on network TV, you have to appeal to the widest common denominator because you need the most viewers. And like everyone has worked on a show where you do something a little bit risky and then the execs are like, oh, tone it down, this is too niche. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be a show that like runs for many seasons, sometimes like that's why they got weird, because at that point the networks were like, you know what, like Buffy, you've been on for so long, in these last few seasons, do whatever you want, I guess.
Exactly.
But like shows don't reach that threshold anymore. So like there's a lot of people, of course, like the trolls who are online that are like, why should we pay writers more when shows aren't good? Which like ignores a whole slew of shows that are great, first of all,
Naturally.
but also like why does it maybe feel like some things have sort of fallen off? And it's because once the streamers happened, then the networks had to apply to an even wider base.
Yeah.
So the appeal of like streamers was we can make something super, super niche. Like the Stranger Things guys, like the Duffer Brothers famously like pitched it everywhere. We're told no. And then finally Netflix was like, yeah, sure. Let's put this weird thing. Like it's sort of like the 80s. It's sort of like a love letter to, like all the great directors of the 80s.
Yeah.
And like D&D, which is still a super niche thing.
Yeah.
Like they were able to be made. So I think that the numbers are lower. I think that, they just sort of have to adjust expectations, and the people creating those shows should not be paid less because you're not like properly marketing your show, or which are things like nothing to do with, right? Like I've written on some shows and people are like on Twitter are like, how come I didn't hear anything about this show? And I'm like, yo, I'm a writer. Like I have nothing to do with the advertising. Like I'm not, like I can tweet to my several thousand followers and that's about it. Like, but unless you're one of the 6,000 people who see that tweet, like maybe you're not going to know the show I wrote on. So like there's so many things that go into it. But yeah, I mean, if you do, the brilliant thing about the WGA deal is that like writers still get paid residuals, whether a show does great or does poorly, which was always how it was. It's just, it's more success based. So you get more money if Stranger Things is a huge hit, which again, is the residual system TV is based on.
Exactly.
Like we already had residuals. You still made a product, so you still get a baseline. It's just if it's a runaway hit, you get more.
Yeah. Was there any talk about what we're seeing with things like Over the Garden Wall, where they're like, well, because while there's heavy speculation about them pulling shows, like we were talking about, like kind of like the death of physical media, but also the death of shows, because we all thought that we didn't need physical media because everything was going to be streamed, but then it turns out entire shows are being pulled because for no good reason.
Right.
Is it because they don't want to pay residuals, and is that enough? Like it could possibly be cost effective. Yeah,
it's truly not, because I've seen this sort of like narrative of like, well, they don't want to pay residuals, but again, like it's super low
pocket change comparatively.
But what it actually is that if they can create a show and then pull it and prove a loss in terms of like taxes,
right,
then they get tax breaks and then they get money. So that's what it is, which is much more than they would be paying in residuals. And again, it sort of goes back to these tech bros that are saying like, well, this is what we do in the tech sector, so like let's do it in this sector, which ignores the fact that like you created, it's not like content, it's not a product, like you created a work of art that now they're basically like, let's pull this art off the wall and put it in storage and tell them that like, well, since no one can see it anymore, we are taking a loss. It's not the entertainment industry is not the same as every other industry and should not be treated as such. But the problem is now you have people who know nothing about the industry coming into it. It's like when you sit down at Thanksgiving and your uncle is like, this is a show. This is right here. This is show, and you're like, that's not how it works. Like it's not. And they're like, why don't you just sell this show? Or I see this a lot on Twitter whenever I'm saying like, oh, the industry isn't great. There's always one or two people that say like, just make your own content, and it's like that's not how it works. Like as someone who like has created content, like that's not giving you a salary, as we both know. To live off of right away or immediately. So people were like, just film yourself. Just do this funny thing. It's like, there's a reason why TV is so difficult to make and difficult to make good. And like someone with their iPhone on TikTok is not making a salary. No,
that's true. There is a misunderstanding of, and I think a deliberate one, made by TikTok and content creators, etc., because like, you know, we want it to look better than it is, or TikTok is like, we, you know, no, like, make content for us. You could live lavishly as a result. And it's like,
right,
no,
right.
This is not a reality.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah. And also it's like, you know, even people who do well on TikTok, it's like, you know, less than like 1% of people are really like making the big bucks from it.
And it's not like it's a career. You're not going to get residuals.
Right,
you're not going to get like you're going to get maybe like a year out of it. You know, you're not going to get like
you're going to get free stuff and maybe some sort of like endorsement deal for like to put commercials in your TikToks, which is like great.
Yeah, cool. I want to do that forever. Like that's not a life. Nor is it sustainable. That's the problem. Is it's not sustainable.
Right.
But,
exactly.
Yeah, man. Well, it sounds exciting. I'm very happy for you. Now, you said it's not officially voted in, but it was accepted.
Yeah. So basically what happens is the negotiating team negotiated with the AMPTP, the body that represents the streamers and the studios, to say like, yes, this is a good deal. Then they bring it to leadership, the WGA West and East leadership, who all voted unanimously yes on it. And then it goes to the membership. So by the time it gets to us, it's already gone through several tiers of very smart people being like, yeah, this is a good deal. I think it's not only going to pass, I think it's going to pass with like 98% approval, probably pretty close to what the strike approval was, which was, I think, 98.6% of our membership who voted yes. Strike. I think that same percentage is going to vote it in. Nothing is ever unanimous. There's always going to be one person who probably hasn't like written in years. That's like, I don't know what this is. I'm going to vote no. But I think it will pass overwhelmingly. I am voting yes. I will encourage other people to do that. It is a great deal. I think SAG is probably on their way to making a similar deal. And then it's just, I mean, writers are already allowed to sort of go back to work in the interim, but once it's official, then it's official. And then we just wait for SAG, and then next year we wait for the two other unions that might also go on strike.
Oh my God. Well, I'm very happy for you. Congratulations to you. And
Thank you.
I really appreciate you shining a light on this, because I think, you know, it's important to get insight from the actual source, from somebody who actually knows the hell is going on over there, as opposed to just being like, you know, I guarantee you there's a significant portion of the audience that's watching that was like, no, I saw an article that said that they was approved. I didn't read the damn thing, because I didn't either. I was looking at them like, okay, yeah, I'll just ask you to.
Right. And also, it's going to be like anything else that's popular, right? There's always going to be someone who's like, actually, Everything Everywhere All at Once wasn't a good movie. And you're like, are you just saying this to be contrarian? Like, there's inevitably, because of the fact that membership was so happy with the deal. I mean, there's no, you know, like, journalists don't get clicks by being like, everyone happy, things going well.
Everything worked out great and everyone is fine.
Yeah. So there's inevitably going to be journalists that are like, should they have struck for this long? And like, membership is like, hell yeah, we should have. But they're like, let's ask this titillating question to get clicks, you know, like, and I get it. I would just hate for that to be the only narrative out there, and people to be like, well, I read on Ankler that like, maybe you shouldn't have struck for that long. And it's like, cool, that was our option. That was what happened. Like, you could say we shouldn't have, but we had to. So.
Right. No. Anyway. Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. Is there one social media hub or place they should go?
I mean, you mean not the 9 composite social media sites that have cropped up that I wanted to get my username on, so I signed up for all of them. I think like Twitter and Instagram are what I use the most still. And I'm at Gina Ippy on there, but also I'm there on Blue Sky and hippopotamus.com and whatever else the new thing is. I'll always be Gina Ippy on those. But yeah, I would say I'm most active on Twitter and Instagram.
Nice. Check her out, and we'll see you guys next time in another episode. Thanks, Gina, for being here. So long, everybody.